For those attendees just joining, we'll get started at 1:35. So 4 more minutes before we get going. Thanks for joining. For those of you who are joining, we're giving everybody just a few minutes to get started. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes here at 1:35 Eastern. All right, it is 1:35, so we're going to go ahead and begin. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may find yourself in the world, and welcome to the webinar Mobile Identity Verification, where user experience meets compliance, presented to you by Mitek in collaboration with Let's Talk Payments. I'm really happy to have you all here today, and for those that are joining, thanks for taking the time out of your night, morning, evening, wherever you are, to spend with us. We're really excited about the panelists and the folks we have on the phone to hopefully help you learn something about mobile identity, compliance, and how that may impact and help your organizations. We have, why are we doing this, I think is the first question. So in today's mobile first world, we're enabling customers to have a seamlessly and secure transact is key for any organization looking to win and retain customers. This ease has also brought fraudsters to move online as well. So we think that financial institutions and payment providers are facing an even stricter and cumbersome KYC and AML regulations. And so to boil that down, as technology is enabling all sorts of really wonderful things, it's also presenting some risk as well. And we have a great panelist here to talk about why and what technology is used today that can help not only comply with these types of regulations, but also improve the customer experience as well. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. We have 3 presenters, and then we'll have a Q&A at the very end. My name is Patrick Rivenbark. I'll be your moderator, and I'm from Let's Talk Payments, a fintech research company helping making collaborative innovation in fintech globally happen in whatever way possible that is. Our presenter is going to be John Smith, Managing Director of Level, Sebastian Tavot, Chief Technologist at Early Warning, and Steve Craig, Director of Product and Experience for Identity at MyTech Systems. And so I know you don't want to hear from me most of the time, as our panelists are much more exciting than I am, have a lot more to teach you. So we're going to jump right in actually and let John kick it off. So John, I'm going to switch over to you and give you remote control here, and you can get started.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here.
You're going to use the bottom left. You click on the, there you go.
Okay. I think I've got it. So, as Patrick, mentioned, mobile identity verification where UX meets compliance. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes, just at a high level, kind of set the stage for some of the topics later. And we'll kind of, just start to go through it. Just a little bit about me. I'm based out of our San Francisco office. Level is actually based throughout North America. We also have a regional presence in APAC, and I'm based on the West Coast in San Francisco. I've spent about 18 years in the technology industry in various capacities, both from product development standpoint as well as in professional services, mostly for vendors or obviously in this case directly through a professional services organization like Level. Previously, I was working, and most directly related to the topics today, I was at mFoundry. I initially led the channel organization, and we built a mobile banking product that supported about 1,200 financial institutions. We were acquired by FIS, and later it was on the FIS digital platform team. So a lot of kind of focus in that mobile space if later on anyone has any specific questions. Currently, I run the West Coast operations for Level and give you a little bit of a flavor about Level. So Level, I like to refer to us frequently as a product development services company. We're a consultancy systems integrator, but we're fairly unique in that not only do we provide implementation services, what I refer to as helping clients build the right product, as in the appropriate technology architecture, but also by providing design and strategy services. We help make sure companies build the right product, which is infinitely helpful when doing product development to not only build the product right, but also make sure you're building the right product to begin with. I won't go into sort of all the services that we offer, but we have a number of different focuses specifically around financial services, capital markets, payments, and a number of other, sort of categories that really go across all those different practice domains. I don't know if many of you have sort of heard this quote before, but Willie Sutton was a famous bank robber, and he was once asked, why do you rob banks? His response, as humorous as it is, was because that's where the money is. And beyond just being a humorous quote, there's several really interesting implications. First, it's pretty clear that really some things have not changed. Fraudulent activities at an all-time high. Both financial institutions, partners, fintechs, who may or may not be disruptors or partners with that financial institution. Anyone that touches or handles the customer data, account information, or really participates in that money movement process is facing increasing risk. That risk comes in multiple forms, both physical, social engineering. A lot of activities really still have sort of a component of a human element interaction, but also through those digital channels. As Patrick mentioned earlier, as more and more activity moves through digital, so will the fraudulent activity. Second, we're seeing continued growth, just in terms of the quote, we're seeing continued growth in that fintech space, capital raise, customer acquisition, startup growth, as well as direct partnerships and direct investments from financial institutions into many of these startups. And of course, we're also continuing to see a number of significant exits as well in the space. And the reason, of course, as Willie put it, that's where the money is. Legally chartered financial institutions are the only entities that can move money. There are many, many entities that certainly provide value-added services up and down that service chain of money movement and financial service activity, but banks really have never been completely disintermediated due to the special status that they have from a regulatory perspective. And as you can expect, since most complex financial products were originally relegated to banks, the special status really led to the accumulation of a significant amount of legacy technology. We often refer to it as technical debt, legacy processes, and legacy products. And what we're continuing to see is this influx of money, effort, and certainly growth from all sectors into the fintech space to really kind of help meet the customer where their consumer expectations are, particularly in user experience expectations. And one thing that's clear, consumers still are continuing to expect or continuing to expect that many of the products that they use behave just like their favorite traditional consumer technology product. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. This image, is of course really the famous image of Gulliver being captured in Lilliput. When we talk about regulations and compliance with many of our clients, this is really the image that comes to their mind, whether it's death of 1,000 cuts or being held down. They really have a significant amount of concern and worry about these particular issues. If you come from a financial services background, you probably really get accustomed to the process and the methodology and a lot of the activities that have to happen behind the scenes. But for many startups and many folks that are coming to the industry, this is definitely the image that comes to mind. And when you think about all of the challenges that really are created by responding to a number of the significant security, compliance, and regulatory regimes that have been built up over the years, it's pretty easy to see how the products have come often to reflect the complexity of that regulatory regime in the way in which they were designed. So I won't go into all the specifics of regulations, compliance, and all the terminology, especially the acronyms. There's quite a few, but we'll at least at a high level talk about AML, KYC, which are some of the most important for the discussion today. AML, of course, refers to anti-money laundering, and KYC, or Know Your Customer, is an important subset of that capability or that requirement. One of the most important parts of interacting with any consumer or entity is really through that initial identification process, where the individual or the entity must reasonably prove their identity to the financial institution so that an account can be created and that the onboarding process can take place. This verification process is really critical in both initializing the account, establishing a relationship, but also triggering a number of downstream future fraud monitoring activities that are based on the user or entity's profile. And this is just a really important and critical step that we'll just kind of talk about in a little bit more depth later. So when you talk about consumers, again, it's really easy to understand how core user experiences get developed. Every successful product has to necessarily, it requires building a solution that hides a significant amount of the complexity below the surface. Whether it's a consumer technology or a financial services technology or a money movement capability, all of the complexity frequently is there regardless, and it must be below the surface. And what's interesting is that consumers, of course, really don't care about the compliance and regulation. They certainly care quite a bit about outcomes, and those outcomes come in multiple ways. Certainly, they expect the product that they bought, the solution that they acquired, to behave in the manner that solves their problem first and foremost. They certainly expect it to be secure. They don't want to, have a product that's developed for them or sold to them be a vector for identity theft and fraud. But at the same time, they don't really think about those things on a daily basis. What they really focus on is what do they see, how do they interact with it, how easy it is to use. And one of the things whenever I talk to a number of our customers and we go through the product strategy and product management, product development process, is we focus a lot on asking what's often referred to as the 5 whys. And the 5 whys is a technique of slicing through a problem to identify what is the real challenge and the real pain point that's being solved. Often, especially when it comes to regulatory regimes, security regimes, and other types of activities that have been done a certain way for many, many years, the answer often to a product manager or someone that's designing a new solution in that space is no. And usually that's followed up by the reason is because the FFIEC or some other regulatory regime prohibits a certain activity. However, if you ask why that activity is prohibited, sometimes you start to get slightly different answers. Usually those answers take the form of, well, this is the way that we've solved this particular compliance challenge, or this is the way in which we've identified our solution. And then if you continue to ask the question why, ultimately what you realize is that meeting the requirement is solvable in many, many different ways. And in order to get to the most simple, the most elegant solution, it requires really diving through a lot of complexity and potentially re-engineering and re-architecting a number of other capabilities. This particular article, simply references a number of ways in which millennials are different. A couple of things, that are clear is that millennials are really more loyal to technology brands than their financial institutions. And this fact really has a significant influence on the growth of fintech and where the fintech space is continuing to go. And the primary reason, when you talk to millennials about the reason for the choices they make, it comes down to very simple things: ease of use. The Starbucks app, ordering your coffee ahead of time. It's a lot easier to do that than interact, wait in line. And so it's not always a direct value proposition of time or money. A lot of times it's a really complex action chain that ultimately makes it easier for certain types of activities to take place through a digital mechanism that's easy and simple than through either a traditional approach or through a poorly designed user experience. And so again, this simply reinforces the fact that user experience, how things are done, how easy it is to consume a product is certainly just as important, if not more important, than using the product itself and its capabilities. Now, that's not to say that everything is, startups disrupting the space and that financial institutions are going to be disintermediated. It's also, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that there's quite a bit of co-opetition. We're continuing to see more partnerships between financial institutions and startups. We're continuing to see more investments, direct investments by these large financial institutions into the space, both consuming the products as well as directly investing as a venture capital capability. And we don't expect every single scenario to be a disruptive force. However, the one fact continues to remain is that the consumer expectations continue to evolve, continue to change, and that a lot of these partnerships and choices are being made to catch up with some of the technology vendors and technology capabilities that have been in place, have been put in place that the financial institutions have not been able to put in place in time. This particular image, I always think this is an interesting image. This is an overhead view of the Virginia Tech campus. And as you can see, the gray areas across the lawn here are actually paths, and the brown areas are what we often refer to as desire paths in user experience. So the users, while they have plenty of adequate ways to get across the quad here, they choose to take the path of least resistance. And whether the product solves the problem or doesn't solve the problem sometimes isn't exactly the answer. A lot of times, whenever you're building solutions, you really have to take a close look at that desire path. How are the consumers taking existing technology and using it in unique ways? How are consumers really shifting the focus from the original thought process towards a different approach? And that's where we often see really a lot of opportunity to fill in some gaps, continue to hone in on exactly how users expect products to work, and make adjustments accordingly. One thing I often like to do as well is just remind people that whenever we talk about computation, historically we've always thought about computation as one thing, and really the desktop application, the desktop kind of user interface, whether it's browser or thick client, always comes to mind. But what people certainly have realized over time and continue to realize is that mobile computing is really a different thing. It's a different beast. Some of the things that are obvious here, of course, communication, cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth Low Energy. There's a multitude of ways in which apps can interact with each other. Individuals can use those apps to interact, and certainly consumers can interact with any of their financial institutions or relationships they have with any organization. The other thing to kind of point out, certainly motion, environment, and position sensors, those sensors really provide a significant amount of information to the developer of what actually is happening with the phone, the position and orientation of the phone, whether the user is actually looking at the screen or the screen is tilted down. All of those things have a significant impact on how things should be designed and can be designed to make that user experience better and easier. Of course, biometrics, Touch ID is just one example, but biometrics have really changed the identity space and made a lot of interesting use cases now capable through just the fact that these sensors and capabilities are available in mobile. In terms of location-based services, proximity, which is primarily Bluetooth Low Energy, location through GPS and Wi-Fi, all of those capabilities change our knowledge of where the user is, how they're using the product, and really again provide additional information whereby solutions can be adjusted. And finally, of course, and perhaps more importantly for this discussion, the high resolution camera that can be used both as a scanner as well as a photographic tool. So sort of finally, I just want to kind of take those thoughts a little bit further, just from a mobile perspective. Just the implications of those sensors and capabilities is that the internet is now everywhere. Historically, again, in computing and computation, there was a concept of online and offline, which is of course why we refer to the internet as online. But in mobile, except for in very specific cases, there's really almost never an offline. A user's always connected, and that interaction and the ability to be connected and interact now changes sort of the user expectation. Location, I mentioned GPS and proximity, both targeted services to provide a user just-in-time services, as well as using location and other proximity type techniques for fraud detection and analysis also provide a significant change in which an overall solution and product can be delivered. Identity, again, historically, phone and computation was done at a location. Now, because the phone actually is in your pocket, it's your phone, and so it really changes the way in which you interact with users' identity. Often, especially in two-factor authentication and many other solutions, we see identity being treated, at least the first level of identity as the phone itself. Second level identity, of course, you can ask users additional questions, but the token itself often is the phone and the presence of that phone related to an individual. Ephemerality is another topic that's less relevant today, but I just want to point it out. As user interaction models change, one thing that's clear is that because we're connected everywhere, and because there's proximity and location-based capabilities, and because we're really talking to an individual, not sort of a mass, collection of individuals in terms of either marketing or sort of direct interaction with the consumer, consumers expect ephemerality. They expect conversations, just like in the real world. And that's really one of the significant reasons why we see the rise of chatbots, chat interaction as a user interface, as well as messaging and voice capabilities. So, we won't go into detail on that, but I believe that user expectation of interacting with, sort of their brands, their financial institutions, is changing to reflect more real world interaction models that they've grown used to in the past. And finally, I'll wrap up with just a few quick conclusions, and hopefully we can talk later through Q&A. The couple of things are important. Make sure that the user journey really takes the center of your user experience. Don't let internal organizational complexity bubble up to the product. Second, as the technology increases the scale, it increases not only the ability to deliver solutions to consumers, but just as obvious, it increases the potential for fraud. And so each solution that's developed and delivered really needs to take into account all the attack vectors and the ability to respond accordingly so that user expectations are able to be maintained, but also profitably. And finally, mobile technology is quite unique. All the sensors and the capabilities are different, and it really is important to make sure that those capabilities are focused on as a differentiator, as a different interaction model, and both on all the different ways in which those services can be delivered are consumable by the application and used appropriately by the application. And finally, consumers are on mobile, so certainly, we're seeing continued growth in that space, and expect to continue to see continued growth in meeting customers where they are, which is mobile. And Patrick, I'll let you take back control.
Sure. No, thank you. So John, thanks for that. I think that's a really good setup for what we're going to be talking about with our next presenter, which is Sebastian Tavot, Chief Technologist at Early Warning. And so for those of you who don't know who Sebastian is, he's got over 20 years of technical professional experience in fintech, and before it was even called fintech, mobile payments, mobile security. And what we really want to do is we want to have a discussion about how this data is being used, give you all, the audience, some more confidence in discussing and evaluating and thinking about mobile identity and how that data is impacting not only customer experience, but the compliance and what's possible. So, Sebastian, thanks for joining us today. And I think probably the best place to start, if you don't mind, is a quick overview of Early Warning itself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you are. So very quickly also, I'm going to give a bit more information about myself. So I'm Chief Technologist at Early Warning. And my day-to-day job is to oversee everything that relates to technology and innovation operation for the company. And prior to that, as you mentioned, Patrick, I've been for a bit more than 20 years in the world of fintech or financial payment on mobile device, POS, and I served in technology role at companies like MasterCard, where I was chief developer evangelist, at PayPal, where I was employee number 7 of the mobile team. So we've been working through this company on a lot of these different topics. So for the one who are not familiar with early warning, and I don't know, John, Patrick, sorry if you have the slide with the logo, but early warning is a LLC owned by 7 banks, of whom you can see the name on the screen. So we have some of the top banks in the US, and actually as a network, a P2P network, early warning has about every single major bank here in the US. Doesn't ring a bell to anyone, early warning, for most of the people on the call, I guess. We are not a pregnancy testing company. We are not a weather storm detection company. We provide actually services around risk and identification for all the banks that you can see. We are also more known, if you've been reading the news, as the company behind a small project called Zelle. And we are actually ramping up for the launch that was announced in the first half of 2017. So if you look at your calendar, we're getting there. And you will see actually the name Zelle and the brand coming more and more in a home near you. And we expect, because of the true cooperation between the banks, to have about 85 million user using Zelle either as a standalone app or as an application embedded inside the bank mobile application.
All right, so I think, yeah, no, thank you for the introduction, just to give a good overview of where you're at. And then just for the audience, so you know, there's a Q&A. If you'd like to ask some questions, we'll get to those at the end. We're gonna take the next 10 minutes, let Sebastian present. Maybe one final one again with Steve from MyTech. So the first question I kind of want to throw at you, Sebastian, is, I mean, obviously technology is a pretty broad term. So I wanna start by kind of breaking it down a little bit, with setting up where John left off about why this is happening, but getting into the very specific to give our audience some definitions, and then we'll get into how that works. Can you talk a little bit about active data versus passive data, and how that's implications for compliance and identity?
Sure, and I always actually like to talk about, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Dave Birch, which is a blogger and fintech specialist in Europe, and he wrote a book called Identity is the New Money. And now if you look at how things have been evolving, actually, data is the new money. If you have data, you can actually monetize and create a unique revenue stream for a company. However, you have to be careful on how you acquire these and what these data actually are delivering and coming from. So the concept of active data and passive data in the world of authentication, in my mind, and again, that's been quite widely accepted as basic definition, but the active authentication is really when you ask the user to do a very specific action. The user will have to either enter a PIN code, will have to use Touch ID to unlock the phone. All of that is part of an authentication process where you are really trying to verify something the user is supposed to be the only one to know. So that's part of the active authentication and what you can acquire from an active data or interaction with the device. Passive authentication is more like based on the digital footprint that a user, a device, an app live on online and sometimes offline. You can create actually very strong triangulation between these 3 elements, between the user, the device, and the environment. I'm going back actually to what John was saying earlier, is we are completely surrounded by sensors today on our phone, on our wrist, in our necklace, even in our clothes coming soon, or even in what you're buying something at a store. If you have an RFID tag on it, guess what? That's a sensor. So you can re-extract, as in passive authentication, again, that the user does not have to contribute that. You can get location, you can get some communication as what is the service provider identification used with that phone number, for example. What is the phone number that is registered? You can get, like, again, motion, the environment of the device being used, the position, all of that build up into data that can be seen as passive data or passive authentication. you combine both active and passive, and you can get pretty strong understanding of your user and create, again, like consumer profile or user profile you can leverage.
Yeah, so from that, can you talk a little bit about how it's actually being used and giving some examples of this combination of active and passive data? And what's that that's looking like today?
Sure. So if you look at how it's been done, I always look at, we are in cycles. So 10 years ago, I was at PayPal, and that's already been 10 years, creating the mobile application. The real focus was on how to get user to interact with the mobile device, right? It was not about focusing on what is the security, focusing on what is the authentication. It was mostly as creating a user base, and building up on that. So the big focus was really on user experience. And that meant that we were looking at way to really simplify the process. Then we went to the new wave, and again, John was mentioning that, where the regulators stepped in. There were a lot of more control that were put in place. The willingness of companies to accept actually the risk and bear the burden of fraud was getting lesser and lesser attractive when you have more and more users. And with all of these, then added security was put in place to answer either the regulatory constraint or to just mostly reining financial loss from the scale when the application was successful. So all of these control actually were added friction and frustration around the user. And for the early users back in the days, we have all been looking at our phone after we have entered all the information we were requiring for, and looking at these little spinning wheels that doesn't get you anywhere. So that frustration was very visible, for example, in Europe with the network implementation, where you had secure code or 3D secure that were added to mobile experience, and was one of the biggest point of failure. One of the company actually was pretty good at it was Apple, and when they started introducing the keychain management for credential across their devices, granted around their environment, but that simplified a lot of the frustration from the user. I always use that example, which was very in the mind of everyone at eBay, was eBay PayPal. When someone shop on a mobile device, you have 75% that they're going to, mostly 65%, sorry, that they're going to abandon the cart, not even finish the transaction. Every additional screen that you add in the checkout flow, you are adding 15% chance that you are not going to close that cart. The consumer is going just to drop. So if you add 2 additional screens in your user experience flow for security reason or whatsoever, you are not in business. You're mostly dead on track. So with that in mind, which was the early days, where Wild West, where mostly user experience, then more security, we are now in phase 3, as I see, where we can actually leverage passive authentication to create better experience. We don't have to bug the user and asking for a lot of things when we understand the environment better than ever. And with all the sensors again being added, now we can actually remove the friction and add more security.
And so, hey, before you go into that example, let's go to the next real quick. I think this will tie it all together. Then I want to kind of make a one to bring out some use cases, right? So before you do that, the big and small data. Why don't you talk a little bit about small data versus big data, and then we'll move into let's combine all these together, and that'll give us a good picture of how active, passive, small, and big can be used for an individual in the customer experience.
Absolutely, and I'm pretty sure everyone is familiar with big data, but I'm going to place that back in the mind of how the industry has been approaching some of the experience. Small data, in my mind, is what is really linked to a specific user. That is generated by the content the user watch, the behavior, the environment in which the device of the app is being used, and that is key. For everyone who try to create what I call a truly unique experience. So if you want your user to feel like they're a VIP and they are the most important person in or for your company, that's how you do it. However, there are also things that are very important to keep in mind with small data because of the unicity and the capacity to be linked back to the user is you need to be very aware of how you protect them and also get a clear disclosure on the usage. So you need to let your user know what you are trying to capture, and you need also to acquire the user consent on using these. Don't get me wrong, everyone knows the TNCs, term and condition, that are very small print on a mobile device that no one's ever read. But if you pay attention and you print them, actually, you will see that most of the time it's sneaked in there and it's probably in paragraph like 47 or 48 of the term and condition or licensing condition. So, but the user consent needs to be acquired either by law or because these are considered as protected and restricted data. Again, you know, one of the examples I use is if I go to a specific merchant and I buy a specific product, now you can know what are my tests, what are my preferences that are associated with that purchase, and maybe you can start deriving trends of my actions just by looking at what I've been doing. I don't know if there is any question. I'm trying to look at the chat room, but I'm going to move on big data, which is, I think everyone understands that. That's mostly the aggregation of our collective information. There is way around big data to create anonymization, to bundle these in such a way that it's easier and less traceable to a specific individual. We can also help propose individual experience based on small data analysis aggregation, and also the big data experience anticipation or predictability of what we are seeing. And I don't like, Patrick, I can use the example that I was using of one of the example of combining these to create a unique experience.
Yes, I think a good combination example would be great before we move forward. That'd be perfect.
Sure. So I think one of the things that you can get as I go to a restaurant next to my home, you will know that if you're doing your work as, you know, doing the risk analysis and everything, I'm going to transact in that restaurant. I may have been in that restaurant like 20 times before. It's in the same zip code. It's probably like 2 blocks down my street. So the chance that, you know, I like that type of food, you know, and if you know that saying like pizzeria, then you know it's an Italian type restaurant, I'm probably gonna get pizza. All of these are part of a transaction that help with knowing my test as small data. On the top of KYC, now you have more information about myself. You can combine these and create something unique. Now, however, so my bank or the acquiring bank on the merchant side or the merchant or my issuing bank will know what I'm doing. Big network, and I'm using an example of when I was at MasterCard, they don't have access to that level of specificity for the data. However, they see a lot of information coming in. And what they did was combining these information, these bits and pieces of information coming from the users and some of the bank members, and creating what I call like big data to deliver a unique experience. They anonymize the data. They don't know who is the user. They don't know what the user likes, but they have information on the user zip code and they have information on the merchant profile. As is, it's a restaurant. It's in the category of a restaurant. What was turned around for the neutralization of this data for usage by the general public was the ability to provide an experience that's very unique to a user, and that ended up actually as an API that went into apps like OpenTable or Yelp, where you could see in a specific location, specific merchant, for example, the zip code of the people actually going to that restaurant. So let's say you're going to Pier 41 here, which is San Francisco, which is a tourist trap. You're gonna see like probably like 99% of the people eating in the restaurants there are not from San Francisco. They're from out of town. That's a tourist trap. However, if you walk 2 blocks inland, a bit away from that, you have probably like a dozen of restaurants that are mom and pop shop and where all the locals go after hours for happy hours or for food. So now by just taking the time to look at the apps and going around the corner, you can have an experience that's much more regional or local versus being in the middle of tourist land. So that's an example of combining both small and big data.
And I think what's important to take away from that is a lot of that can be captured to what John alluded to, but you use this passive data as well, which is these can be things that are captured without having to ask the user, right? Their location, their zip code, the restaurant, the when they're using their phones, interacting. I think that's a really important part of doing this. So using the big and small data, the passive asset data. You specifically talk about, as a community, and we have 4 more minutes left here to talk through this. So, what is it about, this idea of getting data from a lot of different places that actually makes the community more safe and more compliant?
Well, what you create is mostly a pool of knowledge, right? And was mentioned like co-petition or even cooperation and various industries working together is now again, if you clearly acquire the consent from the user, again, by law, by UX design, now you have some leverage to create environmental data that can be used, again, to not create friction. So you can get a strong profile of the user. You can match against your own risk model and policies. Now you mentioned AML and KYC on the slide. That's a never-ending process. And now actually you can get better at KYC and AML because you have this richness of shared data that you can use and really tweak and tune in order to make better decisions. That's even more visible, with all the willingness of competitors to work together, trying to solve problems. You have single sign-on, for coming from the Facebook of this world or Twitter of this world that is accepted as point of entry in some of online properties. Early warning is another example, that was created by all the banks as a cooperative ground to solve the problem of risk and some of the danger associated with moving money on the behalf of third parties. And sometimes if you have that direct connection, you may be taking more risk than necessary.
Yeah, and I think something to take away from that and sort of synthesize that a little bit is a lot of the data that you already have, you can start using to build that. But more importantly, building this passive data and this user small data is actually really important to start now. So that enables you to, it kind of compounds in its benefit later on.
Yeah, it's hard to do it alone, but it's always a good start because your data, your own customers, that's your key foundational knowledge. Then you can complement by data coming from third parties or partners or even competitors.
So yeah, so let's talk about one last or a couple of things really quickly. This trust, transparency, and trust that you mentioned before. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Sure, I call it my 3 T's, which surprised you when you saw trust twice and you asked me that was a mistake, which is not. But the first, what I call like the first trust is really like the user needs to trust your product, needs to trust your apps, your services. And that doesn't happen overnight. You need to create your reputation as a company, and that takes years. And as a quick reminder, you can lose it in a few days. Example, look at airlines companies right now. And you always have to keep in mind, you need to treat your customer with dignity, empathy, and understanding. And that trust is then communicated also by the behavior of your staff and the way you present your products to the consumer. So the user needs to trust your brand. Transparency is also part of the corporate behavior that you need to have. You need to get the user to understand everything that you're doing. Always lean on the cautious side versus like, oh, that's just obvious, the user will get it. And you need to make sure, again, you need to acquire the user consent before you do anything and be very transparent as what you're going to do with what you collect and how you're doing it. And again, you need to establish that feeling of shared control on the contribution the user will do to your database. And then the last trust, going back to the last trust, is the user is going to trust you with his or her data, small and big. And in that sense, it's going to trust your security. Working for a lot of banks, the user will just assume by default that security is built in, and they should not have to worry about it. So you need to put all the measure controls and solution in place to protect at all costs the data that's being contributed to you, and so that the user trusts that you are doing everything to protect. Again, goes to the debate of privacy, the debate of personal information and everything. So just to make sure you're also always within the scope of the law.
Yeah, and I think the last thing we want to finish up here is just what do what's the audience take away really quickly in the 2 bullet points here of, when they're evaluating this type of technology, how would you summarize the 1 or 2 questions they should be asking themselves when looking at evaluating these things?
Sure. So that goes back again to different things, and I don't know if you want to go into the Mythbuster or no, but what you have to look at is it's always very tempting to focus on the short term, but you need to focus, keep an eye on the horizon, right? It's always expensive to rebuild a new platform from scratch on a regular basis every 2 or 3 years because you are so focused on the short term that you miss the latest trend in technology. And then you also need to focus both internally and externally. And I always use the example of Amazon, where APIs are mandatory for consumption internally and externally. If you are building a product at Amazon, it must be exposed to all the other business units via APIs, so they can leverage and take ownership of part of the product to create new products. So you need to also focus on how you are using your own technology internally, not just how it's being used by the user externally, and getting some feedback there. And again, be very careful of buzzword, like you can talk about machine learning, you can talk about artificial intelligence, virtual reality. They are all very important, don't get me wrong. That's where some of the experience are going to come from in the very near future, but just don't throw them around randomly because it sounds cool.
Excellent. Well, I think on that we'll end, and then appreciate your insights on this, Sebastian. And we're going to go to our last panelist, which is Steve from Mitek. So I'm going to give you the reins here, Steve. I think you should be able to get going.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Sebastian and John, for your content before. My name is Steve Craig, and I'm responsible for products on the identity business at Mitek. I'm going to take you through just a few slides about Mitek, the use case. We've got some pre-recorded demos for you, and then we're going to cut right into the Q&A portion. So let me get this started here. So if you're not familiar with Mitek, Mitek is a global leader in mobile capture and identity verification. Our best known product is Mobile Deposit. So if you've ever used a banking app and you've deposited a check through that app where you take a picture of the front and back, that's our technology. We're a public company. We're on the NASDAQ. Our main headquarters is in San Diego, but we also have a global footprint with offices in London and Amsterdam. We've just passed the 1 billion transaction mark on our Mobile Deposit product. So we're very proud of the impact we've had on FinTech. We're a company that works with thousands of companies. So our technology has actually been provided through about 5,600 organizations. Over 80 million end users have been impacted by Mitek technologies. We've got a really strong expertise in identity documents. So beyond checks, we're also doing capture techniques, and you'll see those in the demos, capturing driver's licenses, passports, ID cards for various countries. And the way that Mitek approaches all of our engagements is more as a partner. So each customer we work with to ensure that they're implementing our technologies in the best way, that they have a great experience as a customer of ours, and that their end users have an excellent experience in using of those products. Now, on the topic of payments, looking at how our mobile verification fits in, imagine you're a customer, you want to complete a transaction, you're in the middle of that transaction, and for some reason, there's a high risk event that happens. Now, this could be high value of a money transfer. It could be a volume of recent payment. Maybe it's a credit card transaction. Many of these things create friction in the user experience. I think most of us have received the phone call, the automated fraud alert, or we've received the email where there's an extra step for us outside of what we're doing to confirm that it is us doing that transaction. Well, this is where Mobile Verify fits in. So imagine you're doing that transaction on your mobile device. You've triggered that high risk fraud event, and you go through our Mobile Verify flow, and then you're improved. So you haven't had to jump out of the experience. You present your identity document, and you're set. So this is really helping with faster and safer transactions, verifying the identity of those users who might hit the Know Your Customer threshold, also helping with meeting the strict and stringent AML and KYC regulations, and then ultimately making a better experience for your end users going to help with churn rate, making sure they don't jump over to one of your competitors. So it's very important to put that at the core of your workflow and process. So in the next few slides of content, we're going to go through some demos. So first up is our Mobile Verify for native. Imagine you've just triggered a high-risk transaction. Here, the user is going to be asked to present their driver's license. I don't see the video playing. Let me go back and kick this off. So here, imagine the first step is presenting the user with information about providing the driver's license. So we're going to start with the back of the driver's license. The majority of driver's licenses in the US have a barcode. It's a PDF 417 format. Our product uses the rear-facing camera to automatically scan and detect that barcode and extract information from it. From there, the next step is asking the user to present the front of their driver's license. So here we're providing some real-time feedback to that user, get closer to the document. Once it's lined up, we capture the document. Now we're also in that process doing a verification of the authenticity of the document. We're searching for the presence of a security feature that's in the majority of US driver's licenses. That's happening right during that session. It happened pretty quickly. The ultimate goal, though, is to complete that and give the end result to the user of a verification. Let's see if I can get the video to play. I'm having some control issues here. Go back. Okay, so I'll get the results. All right, let's play the video now. So here the user's completed the transaction and the ID was verified. The information that we've extracted is presented here just for demo purposes. You can see the information was pulled from the driver's license. That can be used for other parts of the process as well. But here in this scenario, the ID was verified. We would allow that user to go ahead and continue for their next transaction. Now, imagine a scenario where there's a fraudster and they're trying to change something in the document. So one of the things that we're doing during the security feature scan is also making sure that nothing has been modified. So let me go ahead and play this one. It's going to be a similar process, starting with the back of the license. Once we've captured and extracted that information, we're going to flip right in to capturing the front of the document. Here, we're going to change the face. So we'll be able to identify the document. We'll find the four corners and it's going to fit the guidelines and be captured, but we won't be able to find the security feature here. So we get in this result a partial match. So something in that document changed. And from here, you may drive the workflow for this user to a different step and may block them from completing the transaction because there's some suspicion of fraudulent activity. Now, everything you've seen so far here is in a native context. We also support products in the mobile web. The big difference for our mobile web technology is we don't have as much access to the camera hardware, the video stream. So here we ask the user to capture the document manually. So that's what you'll see here. It's in a browser. This is in Safari. We provide some instructions to the user to help the user be successful, like watching for glare, make sure the document's within the full view of the camera. The user then takes a picture of that document, so we're going to capture. And then from here, the next step is going to be taking a picture of the back of the document. So let me go to the next slide. We're going to capture the back. It's a similar process. So getting both the front and back allows us to do a few things. Take the information extracted from the front and compare that to the information that we're going to extract from the back. So we're going to have the user capture. They're going to use that photo. And then our mobile verification process is happening quite quickly. So we're pulling the information that we got from the ID, but we're also validating those images in our cloud, and we're returning results back. So here is a verification score. Again, this is not something we would show to an end user, but it shows the types of information that come back for the financial institution or the payments provider to process that transaction and decide to go to the next step in the workflow. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Patrick. I think from here, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So any questions, please send them in. Patrick?
I'm sorry, I was just talking to everybody on mute. Yes, we have two questions. So first, the most banks and financial institutions seem to be doing just the bare minimum in this area. So from a regulatory compliance point of view, or maybe because it saves them from contingent liability, in this, customer experience is generally ignored. Does anyone want to take a comment on this and how this can be addressed? And let me know if you need me to repeat the question. So basically, why is it, doing the bare minimum? What do you all think about that? Do you agree that folks are just doing the bare minimum, and why do you think that is?
So this is John. I mean, I'll take a quick stab at it. I think there's several reasons that at least I've encountered. I think one of the first and most obvious reasons is that a lot of financial institutions, particularly in the U.S., don't actually control their user experience. Many of them are actually leveraging whether it's FIS or Fiserv or other products, and so they're kind of on a product life cycle, so they do have some limitations. I think the other reason is that financial institutions, have historically, focused a lot more on, creating the financial products themselves and not necessarily sort of the delivery side. And they haven't built up sort of a product management and product development methodology to really move fast and really adopt some of these new technologies. So what takes a very short time to implement may take 2, 3, 4 times longer to actually test and get into market. And then, of course, significant things have changed since then. And so what we often see is that those challenges in terms of moving fast and being able to deliver software fast, often we refer to that as part of a DevOps capability, is something that's just now really making its way into some of those financial services firms. But that's a high-level answer.
Sebastian, Steve, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was going to say actually, again, like to the point of John, the banks are going now in that direction. And again, there was a lot of, for the longest time, trying to figure out, okay, what is a mobile banking app versus what is a mobile experience first, right? That changed quite some time. The example, again, I'm living that every day at Early Warning, is we are owned by a lot of banks. And the discussion that we've been having in delivering Zelle as a product has always been, how do we keep it as simple as possible for the user so that the experience is great? And you will see that in the product, but the user experience was on the top of the mind for all the bank's members. Again, that was created by a company that is owned by all the bank, a LLC, not necessarily by bank themselves, but they are really like putting their mind and energy and money actually to creating a user experience that goes beyond just what was seen as mobile banking app before.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add, this is Patrick, is that I think to what John and Steve and Sebastian highlighted is we're actually getting to an era that a lot of these sensors and other elements, that whether it's our mobile phone or wearable devices and new technology, is enabling some new things that you can have a really great customer passive experience that doesn't require this really bad minimal experience, particularly for compliance, right? And I think that's what's kind of exciting about where we're headed. Because of the ability to stop asking customers these things actively and being able to focus on the job, whether it's a payment, whether it's verification. And so I think that's an important element of what's being enabled today in a mobile and wearable world.
I can give a quick example, by the way, of innovation and user experience. You have a bank actually that just released an app, and I think you can find it probably on the Let's Talk Payment website, which is purely based on virtual experience. So you're wearing your VR goggle, you're working in a virtual bank, you're interacting with a virtual cashier, and you could even actually sneak at that point, like some of the MyTech technology, and present your real driver's license from your home by taking a picture and virtually presenting it for a cashier for KYC. But these are where they are going. So again, to your point, Patrick, a lot of new technology coming in, and the banks are getting less and less shy about playing with these and creating new experience, which is the good news.
Yeah, definitely. And Steve, we have one last question for you from Claire. How sophisticated is the authenticity technology? So I'm not sure if you want to how you want to take that, but it's a pretty broad question.
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing that it depends a lot on is the capture point. So in the demo that I just shared, we've got both native as well as mobile web On our native side, we've got a lot more access to the camera, the hardware through the operating system. So we can do things like the security feature scanning. The quality of the image is a lot better because we're doing computer vision analysis in real time. On the mobile web side, we don't have the ability to do a video stream due to some browser limitations. So the information we're getting there is less. So some of the things we do in mobile web and native are similar. So we're extracting information from both the front and back of the document. We're doing comparisons. We're matching against known templates and versions of those documents. We're also inspecting for changes in the document itself, such as differences in font and other areas where a potential fraudster might tamper. And it varies quite a bit across the documents because different documents have different security features. Globally, in different parts of the world, passports are a very common identity document to be used. And so the techniques are going to be different. I think for that kind of question, would be good also for Claire to reach out to one of our experts and go into a lot more detail.
No, fantastic. Well, I think with that, we are definitely out of time. I want to thank John, Sebastian, Steve for presenting today, and we were really happy to be having some interesting discussions on identity and Mitek. Thanks for presenting this. And obviously, we're going to be recorded this. This will be out sooner at some point to review, and we appreciate everyone's attendance. And we're going to close with that. Thank you all.